Hi there, and welcome to Frontline. Today we're going to be covering workflow creation in detail. To access workflow creation, begin by logging into Frontline. Once you're on the home page, click the Creator tab. You can do this by clicking the 9 squares in the top right corner and selecting Creator from the drop-down menu. You can also click on the New Workflow tab from the home page. This will open the Creator page. Let's begin by covering the basic layout of the page. On the top, left, and right of your screen, you have 3 toolbars. The one on the top covers your basic saving and creation tools. The one to your left is the Step column and contains the main tools you'll be using when creating workflows. And the one to your right is the Configuration column, which allows for advanced saving, publishing, and interaction tools. The middle of your screen is your workplace for creating workflows. Let's begin by covering the tools at the top of your screen. Starting from the top left, you have the File drop-down menu. This drop-down will allow you to create new workflows by clicking New. Open previously made workflows using Open, and save and name your workflow using Save and Save As. You also have the Extras tab. When this is hovered over, you have the option to import or export a workflow, open Advanced Mode, which we will cover later, import a PowerPoint, component, or function, reset your layout, or delete your workflow entirely. Finally, you also have the option to unpublish your workflow. This will take this version of your workflow offline. Next to the File drop-down, you have the Save icon. This allows for quick saving as you work. The Device drop-down allows you to select a device and test your workflow on the screen of a device. This goes in hand with the Preview icon next to it. Clicking this lets you test your workflow on a device as you work. To the right, there's a cloud icon, indicating if your workflow has been published or not. And finally, on the far right of the navigation bar, you have your User drop-down menu and phone icon. For further information on using these, you can access your Frontline manual. Now we'll cover the tools on the right side of the screen within the Configuration column. Most of the tools on this toolbar are more advanced versions of the tools on your top toolbar. This toolbar has 2 separate tabs to select: Workflow and Shared Properties. We'll begin with the Workflow tab. The first row contains the name of your workflow. Next to it is a pencil icon so you can quickly change the name of your workflow. Below that is the date and time the workflow was created and last edited. Then we have a button for Advanced Mode. When you click this, it opens a window where you can code your workflow rather than use tools to create one. Next is the Version section. Here you can save different versions of your workflow and select which versions you would like to be published. You can also create workflow tags. These tags help you organize your workflows into different types. And finally, you have interaction types to select from. It's important to keep how your workflow will be used in mind when picking interaction types. For example, if you're making a workflow for logistics, it would be important to make sure your users can use scanners with the workflow. We will go more in depth into each of these interaction types later on in the video. Depending on your current workflow and what components you're using, there may be another tab next to the Workflow tab. The functionalities of this tab change depending on what's needed. On the left side of your screen, you have the Steps column, which contains your primary tools for creating workflows. Along the very left side of the column, you'll notice icons that divide this column into sections. The first icon represents UI templates you can use. Each of these templates can be dragged into the workflow creation area and added into your workflow. You have a variety of templates at your disposal, ranging from just a title and text to a page that opens the scanner. The next icon indicates your custom templates. Once you change the UI of a template and save it, it will appear here. Now we have the components. Components are pre-made steps that can be added into your workflow. To use them, just drag and drop them into your workflow. A few examples include a checklist, a file viewer, and a date planner. For a full list of all the components available to you, refer to your Frontline manual. Note that some components require more setup effort than others. The icon below represents functions. Functions can be more advanced, so proceed with caution while using them. Generic functions are used to create a custom decision tree. Think of if-then statements. The loop function keeps you from having to make steps that loop back to a certain step. You can use this on repetitive tasks and have a user repeat the action until they're done. Resources is the next icon. This is where you can find all media that you've uploaded for use in workflows. Clicking the plus sign on the right allows you to import media to use. And then you have the Find Step icon. This is useful when searching for a specific step in a long or complicated workflow. Now let's get into the center of your screen. To navigate through your screen, you can use your mouse to click and drag through the page. You can also use the tool at the bottom of your page to zoom in and out. Note that there's a transparent box to the bottom left called the Minimap. This shows you what your workflow currently looks like. Let's take a look at some of the tools you have in your work area. On the top left, there's two buttons. The top one is for adding new steps. To use it, simply click it, then click where you want the next step in your workflow to appear. Then you can use the Transition tool to add transitions in between each step. Do this by selecting the tool and clicking and dragging between the steps. At the bottom of the workspace, you have a few more tools that can customize your work area. You have the option to turn on and off the visibility of the grid, labels, and Minimap. There's a small arrow at the very bottom of your screen that can be helpful. When you click this arrow, it opens a pop-up that can let you know if you have any errors in your workflow to look out for. Now let's make a practice workflow so we can see all the tools in action. We'll create one on making a cup of coffee using a Keurig machine. To begin creating a workflow in the program, we'll click File on the top left, then select New from the drop-down. We'll start by giving this workflow a name. Call your workflow whatever is appropriate for the task. For this example, we'll call it Coffee Practice. And then we'll click Submit. When you first create a workflow, it will begin looking like this, with 3 steps: Start, Step, and End, with a transition arrow in between each. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to delete the step that Creator already has in our workflow. Now let's begin by picking a template for our title screen. I would like one with a title and an image, so the user can see what their end result will look like. This looks like a good choice. We'll just drag it over into our workflow. To edit this step, we just have to select it. On the bottom right, you can change the text and image. If you find it's too small for you, just click this button to pop out the step and make it larger. Let's title this step, Making Coffee Using a Keurig. Then we'll click the image icon to add an image. This will open a pop-up with all the media we have uploaded to Creator. Since we have none, we'll click Upload Media and select which images from our computer we'd like to use. After we've customized our step, we'll name it in our workflow. This helps in keeping you organized as you go. To do this, double-click the step. We'll name ours Title. At some point, you'll have to create transition arrows between your steps. These arrows indicate how a workflow branches from one step to another. You can either begin adding them now or after you're done creating your steps. We recommend creating your steps first, then adding transitions afterwards, to avoid any confusion. Skip forward to this timestamp to get more information on transition arrows before using them. Now let's move on to our next step, gathering materials. For this step, we'll use a checklist component with a list of all the items they need. To add a checklist to the workflow, go into Components and drag the checklist into the workspace. We set up our checklist on the right side of the screen. Let's change our headline to Make sure you have all listed materials. Below that, we'll pick how we want the checklist to appear in the view screen. We just have 4 materials, so we'll keep this as is. But if you have a bigger checklist, you may want to change how many rows appear on the view screen. Then we'll select what must be checked from our list for the user to move on. In this case, we'll pick all. Now let's move to the options to input the required materials. The items on the left are option keys. This is what a user will say when selecting the item from the list. The items on the right are option titles. This is what a user will see on their screen. The Data tab is where you'll go if you want to publish your component. So if this is something I would use in the future, I would publish it here. The next few steps are simple, so we'll be using drag and drop templates. Let's drag one onto the work area for pouring water. We'll give it a title and description, just like we did for the title screen of our workflow. We'll repeat this process for the steps of turning on the machine, opening the K-Cup compartment, and putting in the cup. Be as descriptive as you would like, and make sure to title all your steps once you've made them. After that, we'll make the workflow branch off based on their ounce selection. Let's drag a question UI template onto our workspace. This will ask the user if they need any help deciding on what ounce selection to make. If they select no, they'll move on to the next step, selecting their ounces. If they say yes, we'll ask them a follow-up question. What does your cup look like? Depending on the cup size they select, a user will get taken to a corresponding step that lets them know which ounce selection to make. In this scenario, we'll include an image of the corresponding button on the Keurig machine to make sure the instructions are clear no matter what type of machine they're using. After we've made all 3 steps that correspond to the cup size decision, the branch will flow back into the workflow. The next step will be to place your cup in the Keurig. All the previous steps that we had branching off will flow into this one. Now their coffee should be brewed. We'll add a congratulations step. Now let's add our end step. This lets the program know that it's complete. Always make sure that your workflows have an end. In this example, we'll use an end step that creates a PDF with the details of the workflow. To add a PDF at the end of your workflow, click into Components and scroll to the bottom. Here you can select from a PDF report builder or a PDF report builder that also has a questionnaire for the user. We'll select the regular PDF report builder by dragging it onto the end step of our workflow. To make changes to the PDF report this creates, click on the end step and select this icon to open the report builder. Opening the report builder and making changes here is a more advanced process, so proceed with caution before making any changes here. Now our workflow is almost done, but we have to make sure to add transition arrows between all our steps. Let's start from the beginning. Click the transition arrow button located here. To create a transition, click and drag from one step to another. When you first do this, a question mark will appear that indicates you haven't chosen a way for the user to move to the next step. You can add a gesture-based connection where a user clicks a button to continue, a voice-based connection where a user speaks a phrase aloud to continue, and/or a time-based connection that progresses the workflow to the next step after a certain amount of time has passed. You have the option to use any combination of these connections or just one. For this example, we'll use all three to show you how they work. On the right side of the screen, you'll be able to see and edit details about your transition. This is where we'll select which buttons we want a user to hit to make the transition in the workflow happen, what voice commands we want them to say, and how long the delay we would like before the workflow moves on, if we're using a time-based transition. Once we've made a transition arrow that allows a user to progress with the workflow, we also need to make one that allows them to move back. To do this, click and drag from the next step to our previous step. Since these transitions are for moving backwards, we want to make sure both the button trigger and voice command are set to return instead of continue. And with that, we've created a functioning workflow. Before testing our workflow, let's check for any errors by clicking the up arrow on the bottom of the screen. Now we can test our workflow on a device. Begin by plugging in a USB debug device into your computer. Then click the play button at the top of the screen. The device should appear on a list where you can select it and click Debug Workflow. The workflow should then load onto your device where you can test it. With all that said, you should be all set to start creating workflows in Frontline Creator. Please refer to your Frontline manual or speak to your customer service representative for further information.